Hi, I'm Scott Nusbaum. I'm a senior incident response and research consultant with TrustedSec. I wanted to go through and give a kind of walkthrough on how to do some deobfuscation. A lot of times what we see when we're going through malware is we see the same malware over and over. It's just been obfuscated differently to get bypassed different types of protections. And a lot of times these obfuscations are fairly trivial to bypass, but they're just enough that they get past any type of automated scans. So what I was going to hope to go today is walk you through how I deobfuscated a certain type of malware doc. We'll walk through it, getting back to the URL that it beacons out to download the second stage. Um, with this one, we're going to start with this. I'm just renamed it. It's called malware doc samples. I will be using, well, normally one of the first things I do when I get a new piece of malware, I always end up running an MD5 sum, SHA-1 sum, SHA-256 if you want to as well. And then I also run a file on it to see what's going on. I normally end up saving these off into a notes text file so I have that to refer back to later. And in this case, you can see what those come back to. It's an older style document, a Microsoft document, as also depicted by the DOC file extension, which I've also noticed that a lot of times these are fake. You can change it to be whatever you want it to be. So running file on it also normally really helps. The next stage for this, I know I'll end up running the OLE VBA3 script in order to extract out the VBA internal to it, as well as some other information. It will also do a scan of the document to see if it can detect anything malicious. I'll end up sending this out to, I normally send this out to OLE1. I've already done this in this case, so I'll just show you the outputs from that. And as we see at the top, we basically start going through the malware. It lists out each of the individual sections into the same file. There are multiple other tools that will do this similar type of thing. I enjoy this just because it dumps it out in one text file or to one screen, which I pipe to a text file. We can see VBA code here. We can see that it has the auto open, so it instantly is calling main as soon as it gets opened. Scanning down a little further, we see more VBA. We see different types of BAS files that are included. Down the bottom, we also see an interesting HTML with some obfuscated code inside of it as well. Obfuscated JavaScript, that is. There's two of those inside this file, which is kind of interesting. Towards the bottom, we can see that it's tried to do some type of analysis on it. It also depicted the auto runs, the creating objects, a shell is being created. It's also using WSI script or WS scripts. It's opening files and copying files. It's reading and writing to registries. It's got multiple base64 encodings inside of it. And then tries to show you some of the hex strings. For this, what we're going to start off with on this is just copying the VBA files or the, the VBA macros off to another file so that we can simplify them so they're a little more human readable. And we're going to do the same thing with the HTML. But first, we're going to start with the VB. Normally, what I like to do is I like to keep incrementing. So the first file we created was OLE1. I'd like to go OLE2 for the second step. That way I know I have them in order. So if I make a mistake or something, I can always go back and see what happened. And I didn't delete something that I had previously worked on. Uh, so now I'm just going to copy all the VB code into a new thing, a new file. And we can see that it highlights, which makes things pretty nice. The first things that I'll normally do as I'm going through this is I'll go through and I'll start cleaning these up by indenting around the ends. So you can see where the functions or the methods start and stop. It makes things a little bit easier. The other thing that I'll also do is, like for here, I'll go through and delete the comments as well as these little sections in between. It just reduces the amount of code to something that's a little bit easier to see. My Vim is leaving me today, so we'll do it the old way. So, okay, then the next thing I said, I'll go through and I'll find the ends, and I'll try to indent things so that we can see what's inside, where things start and where things stop. Again, this just makes things easier to read. The next thing I'll do after we have these indented is I'll start trying to look at some of these internal functions or the subroutines, just try to determine if it's something that we can easily name. And then when we can name them, we can just start renaming it. For like this one, first thing we see is the copy file here. So pretty easy. Let's just rename this copy file. So now we know that this is copy file. And if you look up the copy file, you'll see that it has source first, destination second. So we know that the input here is first, second. So we can name these down here. We know that this is going to be first and second. So later on, we'll have to keep an eye out for where these get renamed up here. Okay, so we see these three functions. They all have this. They all call this other function or subroutine. And that is actually a replace. So let's rename this as well. Again, for this, I'm not really going through and changing these in a way that can be run. For most of my first attempts through it, I'm just naming them so I can read them. If you want to, it's probably better if you can change it in such a way that you can actually execute it later. But I prefer at this stage not to execute it unless I have to. So now we have a copy, we have a replace. This function here, we open something, then we print to it. So this is actually writing something out to a file. So let's just name this write file. So then this subroutine is pretty easy. It looks like it calls a shell. So let's call it call shell. And this will be the command. So the next things of interest will be these three replaces. Next thing I do to do this is I normally open up a cheat file. Let's just call this temp. Since we're just doing replacing, I will do this inside Vim itself because it's much faster. So we see at the end of it is the bvtk, if I can type that correctly, tk, replacing it with nothing. And that's actually what it did previously inside that replace script. So as we can see, that quickly turns it out to the C Windows System32 mshta.exe. So we'll take that value and just, I like to put it underneath, and then I'll comment out the real one. So just so I know what this is. And then I'll end up renaming this to being, let's just call it get mshta. mshta, and over here, since we know what this is now, I'll just call this mshta. Let's highlight, see what the next one is as well. So now we also fill in, we know what the source that we're copying. We're copying this mshta file. So let's move on to the next one. And I do the same thing. Search and replace the NJ9C and NJ9P, fill it with nothing. And now we can see that we're creating this Microsoft.com file or string. And I'll do the similar thing to what I did above, where I'll just put what it was copied into. And then for this, I'll end up renaming this. I'll just call this micro or get micro. And then rename it down here. As you see, things are beginning to look a little bit easier to read. You can kind of figure out a little bit more what's going on. Sorry, I keep forgetting to search for each of these first. So we name those. We see now that we're copying the mshta.exe into the micro string, which is into the C program data Microsoft.com. And then down here, we're calling the micro and we're passing it in this ATWKI, which we haven't looked up what it is yet. And it appears to be the last string that we haven't decoded. So we'll run through the steps again for the last one. Oops. And this one's the NWNE. So we'll search and replace for NWNE, replace it with nothing for all of them. And now we get the C program data, index.html. So we'll just rename this. Oops, I typed V, sorry. This I'll just call index. Get index. And again here, we'll rename these. So now it's pretty much written out what's going on. Inside, we have the auto run, or auto open, we'll call main. Main right here then decodes the string for the MSHTA, the string for the Microsoft.com, and the string for the index.html. It will then copy the mshta.exe into the so the C program data Microsoft.com. Then it will grab a value from form.in, which we haven't talked about yet, but I will go back real quick. If we search back, remember when we talked about the HTML file that we saw internal? There were two of them. The first one, I'm not going to pay attention to. They're actually identical. But in here, we see the variable in with the form. So it will grab actually this data. Let's go ahead and copy this out into another file at this moment. Let's call it ole3.html. Now we got it there. So now we know that this is the embedded HTML. Let's just call it HTML. So it's grabbing the value that was stored inside this form.in tag, which is the content of the HTML, and it's storing it inside. Sorry, in this case, it's taking the value of it and it's writing it to the index.html. So the file that we decoded the last with the get it index. Once it's written it to that file inside C program data index.html, it then can call the call shell, or it calls the shell with the MSHTA, it calls the micro.com, which is really the MSHTA, which then executes the index.html. It will actually then execute the JavaScript that's embedded into it. And that's the next layer of this malware. So let's save our cleaned up copy of this and kind of move then on to the malware doc, or the malware HTML. Again, one of the first things that I'll normally do going through these is I will try to clean it up so that it's easier to read. Right now, as you can tell, there's just it looks like a bunch of garbage in it. It's harder to read what's going on. You can see certain things like the from char code which looks like something's really going on. There's a for loop there. You can see a registry key. You see a W script. So WS script or W script, sorry. What I'll normally do is I try to clean things up by scripts first, functions, if for loops, things like that, so that it makes things easier. And by cleaning them, again, I just like to indent. I, I love proper indentation. To me, that makes things look significantly cleaner and easier to read. On some of the more advanced ones of these, I will look through, like again with this, you can look through brackets, and you can line the brackets up. So this is a function that starts and ends here. Some of these I will search and replace based off of semicolons if they're run on one line, or other different things such as like the functions. If there's more than one of those, I'll search on that and add certain types of breakpoint or new line characters before and after. And these, okay, let's go ahead and tab all this top part over to make it cleaner. The next thing that I'll do a lot of times along after the tabbing is I will start at the top, and with a lot of these, the attackers or the malware authors will write a lot of garbage in, just to try to get you confused of what's going on. There'll be lots of variables. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, like this one I did a search, and it's the only one that's in the file. So I'll go ahead and delete those. We don't need them. They don't affect anything by deleting it out. Highlighting the function, we see that we do call it later. So I'll come back to the internals of the function once things are cleaned up. This is used right below, but that what it's being used in is not. So we go ahead and get rid of that. So these two are gone. This one, it's used multiple times, so we keep it. Again, let's check that. So these aren't in use. Window resize. Since I'm not executing it, it doesn't really matter as much, but it looks useful, or like it should have been there. So I will keep it. Again, window move, we're moving it off the screen so we don't really see it. Don't really care. This is the W script. Yep, it looks like we're using it with the reg write, reg read, and reg delete. So it's definitely something that we want to keep. String, not using, not using. Okay, he's going to delete these. Now we say, here's an interesting one. We see the content, which is that big string at the top. I tend to have my screen showing without wrapping, so the lines are cleaner. So let's set the wrap, and as you can see, that's a very large string. It clutters up the screen when I'm trying to do RE, so I tend to try to do the no wrap so that it runs off the edge of the screen. But as we can see down here, we're getting that element and we're saving it into this variable. And we're using that next line. We'll get back into what it's using on later, but definitely we need to know that the content is something that's being used. And then reg write we saw above that's being used. Let's go ahead and just take these out for the moment, just because I don't really care about them. Again, we see the read, saving in there, reg. Again, taking that out just for cleaning. Again, I don't use this uh, to execute a lot of times, just because I don't want to accidentally execute something in the malware that I don't really know what's doing. This is the function from above that we saw. And we're using the replacing. It looks like a similar trick to what we previously saw inside the VBA code. It looks like we're replacing the 6 jobs, probably inside the content. Now we're see this function call. It looks useful. Where's that? Yeah, that's used down there. Let's Okay, so now we can go back through and start cleaning up some of the variable names if we can figure out what's going on. Uh, let's start with this. Since we can see that it's a W, you're getting the object for the W script, let's just rename it W script. The next one, we can see this is going to be the content. So we name that. Then we see we call the registry read and write. Oh, yeah, let's rename the key since we know that's a registry key. So the WF script, we're reading the key, we're storing the contents here. So last interesting thing to see here is it passes the registry contents into this function. To back up a little bit, I kind of glossed over. We read the contents value here. We grab the inner HTML, which is just the internals of the. I'm pointing. That's not helping anybody on the screen. It grabs this ID tag. The inner HTML just grabs the contents of it, stores it back into itself, and then we write it to that registry key. And we immediately read it from the registry key, pass into this function the contents of that, and then when we get that back, it performs the replace, and then we see that it passes it uses it as the function for this. So let's try and figure out what this function up here does. So as we can see, it starts at 0. It works its way to the length of the, let's rename this to make things easier to see. Sometimes I just rename the function or the parameters param 1, 2, 3, 4 until I actually know what they are. And this we'll just rename ret value just because it's what's being returned. Again, inside here, we know that these are going to be your counters. Counter, the length of it skipped by 2s, so it's taking every 2. So if we see at the top inside here, it'll go start with 6, then goes 3, 6, 6, 6, 7. If you're looking at those, you can start seeing that those actually line up to normal ASCII codes, just in hex. Uh, so probably dealing with some type of ASCII up there. So it goes through each of those, grabs the substring, starting with the counter, length of 2, converting it to an integer, saying that's the base 16, like we were saying, just saying it's a hex value, 61A. Uh, Converts it back into a string character, tacks it on to that. So this function here, let's just rename that. Convert hex to string. That's basically what's going on. Then the next step after that is it does a replace. So what I normally will do at this point is, again, I'll go off to my temp file, or in this case, I'll actually end up writing a quick Python script just to do it for me as well. Actually, I'll probably just use the temp. And I I'm using Python 2 because I'm still used to it. Oops, getting ahead of myself. So we're coming down, we're replacing the 6 jobs. Not 7 jobs, 6 jobs. With an empty, because that's what it's doing here. Now it helps if I print out the results. As you can see, now we're back to more JavaScript code, more obfuscated JavaScript code. So we'll need to run through those steps one more time. We'll take this output, send it to, let's call it ole3.js. I think we're at 4. No, we were at ole3. Okay, anyway. That's interesting. Ah, yes, the ole3, I never actually saved it, so it didn't show up. Okay. So now we can see that it's all on one line and running. The values, contents of that red content is then passed into this function. It actually is the function. The function will take in values u and c as parameters. This is the new function that's being called here with this value being passed into it. These 2 values. The first one will be u and the second one will be the c. So let's work on deobfuscating the ole4 right now. Again, like I kind of said earlier, I will cheat it some of these times, and I will just do a search for like a colon in this case, and do colon new line, and then dump everything out to one line to make things a little bit easier to start reading with. Then again, I'll start also then breaking out the functions. Again, you'll see the for loops. So that would break out like that. So we're inside a function here. So indent, indent. Again, just cleaning things up. As we're going along with this, sometimes you could also mix up and try to find, okay, so these aren't being used anywhere. So you can delete these out. Okay, we got another function here. We got another function. Let's go ahead and highlight all those and move them over. That's down to there. I'm old school. I like the curly brackets on the following line. To me, that just allows you to line them up. Other people have differences of opinions. See a lot of junk inside those that are not used. And clean that up so you can see that reduces down something pretty readable. Continuing on. Yeah, as I say, we're getting close to the bottom of the file now. So now what I'll go back through and I will definitely start going back through and deleting out the variables that are not in use. Okay, that's used there. That one's in use. Clear those. And we can see that this is grabbing the computer name, the environment string for computer name and user domain. So we could go ahead and rename these at this moment. Say computer name. User domain. So if the computer name is not equal to the user domain, then it'll return a Z. That's interesting. So we'll see what that is. Active. Okay. So we know this is the W script. So let's go ahead and rename that while we're here. So it's used in quite a few places. So it cleans this up. Let's just rename that. It's used in 2 places. Let's call it compare. And continue on cleaning up as we go. You can see a lot of this stuff is not in use. And it's just wasting space. Again, this one's in use. It's opening the ActiveX object, so let's go ahead and rename this. If I can hit. Let's just call this XML and continue on checking. Again, we see a stream. Yeah, it's most likely in use, so let's go ahead and rename this. Let's just call this stream. Continue on. CDW object again being called, so we'll keep that. W object being called, so we'll keep that. So delete a lot of these out of the way. Okay, we're using this to save the file. You can see it at the bottom there. So we'll come back to that later to rename it. Interesting. So here we're seeing a couple of the functions being called. Again, here we see the U's. So that is the U that we saw from the previous, that's being passed in as the first argument here. This is the very long 21616 or 211663. Again, looks really like a lot of hex values. So we'll get back to that in a minute. I like to try to continue cleaning as much as I can before doing too much of the analysis, because sometimes you go down little red herrings that you don't need to go down that path on, and you end up wasting time. Okay, so now we're down to the compare object. Okay, that's just a one-line if. So the xopen, we do a get. Okay, we can see that we're calling the value, the return value from this U. So it will decode to something that we're requesting from the internet. We're doing a get request for it. And there we're doing the send. And again, I like to go through and check all of them, even if I know for pretty much, and I know that they're going to be a wasted variable. I still like to check them all just to make sure I don't make a mistake. So here we can see the check for the request status coming back, ready state. So now we got something back from the request above, and we're going to be processing the output coming back from it. And stream open, we definitely have from above. Stream type. So we're writing the response body into the stream. So now we're saving it off to a file that we name here. So we'll go back later on. Well, we might as well name this to output file. Because we know that's what it's being used for. So basically we open it, we get the type, we write it into the stream, then we use the stream to write it out to a file. Then we close the stream. And all that is not in use. And the final thing that we happen is it runs the regsvr32 with passing in the output file to make it execute it. So we pretty much know what we're getting from the output file. What we're downloading is going to be like a DLL. So at this point, we pretty much know what's happening. So the only thing that's really left is to try to figure out what's happening to that string that we're passing in here. There's going to be some type of deobfuscation on this in order to get the URL that we're going to be requesting inside the GET request. So we can come back up to these and look. So let's just call param1. This one will do a split, so it'll chunk it up. It'll do a reverse and then a join to everything back together. So it'll break it into a string, an array, flip it, and then join it back into a string again. So I'm just going to call this split rev join. Real creative with names. All that really matters is that you know what it's doing when you're looking at it. So when we first get the string coming from the previous, the HTML, it will then come in here, you'll split it, reverse it, and then join it back together. The next step, this looks really similar to what we've seen on the previous, right here. We've already cleaned it up here, so we can just rename this to be the same. We can go through and clean it up if we wanted to. In this case, just for time's sake, I'm not going to do it. So what happens to you is you bring it in, you split it, you reverse it, you join it back together, and then you convert it from hex to string. So in order to do this, we'll come down, take that value, move it over, get rid of that for now. So here's our string. First thing that it did was it truncated, it split it. We're going to then reverse it. And they split, reverse, and join it back together. Since we're doing in Python, we don't really need to do it that way. We can just do the brackets, and then we can do the decode hex. And we can see with the output of that, the string comes out here as being, of course, I modified the string just what was inside the original document so that it didn't go out to some malicious site. But you can see that it decodes out to a URL. And then just so I can know that, I'll put it in there just so I can see it. So in this case, it comes through. It's fully decoded. Now we know exactly what's happening. We're going out to this URL. We're bringing it back. It should download some type of DLL that we're then passing to the reg server 32 and executing. And the DLL is what we're actually wanting to get. Normally what will happen after this step is you'll take that, you'll look at it. It will normally be obfuscated in some manner. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's just the raw malware, but most of the time it's some type of obfuscation inside the malware. And this pretty much ends without needing any other tools such as CyberChef or anything like that. You can do almost all this stuff through, like I demonstrated here, we just use Vim and Python. And very simple search and replaces most of the time is all we used inside Vim, and one-liners inside Python. Things that are pretty easy to generate. Going forward, I would like to do some more videos doing other different types of deobfuscations, similar to this, but inside PowerShell or Java, some more JavaScript or some of the other different tools that people use. I will also want to start getting into a little bit more reversing of actual malware back down to assembly. If you have any suggestions or any comments, uh, feel free to shoot me emails or contact DM me through Twitter. Uh, I can be reached at under SNUS at snooze. Uh, we have TrustSec has a Discord or Slack if you'd like to join those and ask questions. All of the different teams that TrustSec have are available on those. They normally are being watched, so you can get a response back quickly if you ever have any questions. Again, thank you for watching.